Hi everyone, I'm attorney Aiden Durham with 180 Law Co. in Denver, Colorado, and welcome back to All Up in Your Business. In this episode of All Up in Your Business, I'm going to go into detail about how you pay yourself in a single member LLC. I've talked about this topic before in some previous episodes, but in this one, I'm going to go over some of the basics of how you pay yourself, as well as some tips and info to help you make sure you're setting aside enough to save for taxes and also just enough to continue operating your business. But before we get into it, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and check the description for some links to some free downloadable guides and checklists. I've also got a written guide available for you guys to download for free that goes into more detail about how to pay yourself and gives more examples and description about how you go about doing it. All right, so how do you pay yourself in a single member LLC? I'm going to get the first easy part of this question out of the way, which is the how. The how of paying yourself is, for the most part, completely up to you. Unless your LLC's operating agreement is specific on one of these, then the dates, the amounts, and the methods that you use to pay yourself are at your discretion. You can write yourself a check to pay yourself. You can transfer money from your business account to your personal account. You can take that money for yourself in whatever method or mode works best for you. It really doesn't matter. But you do want to make sure that your bank jives with however you plan to pay yourself. I mean, if your bank charges you to order or write checks, and you plan on writing yourself a check to pay yourself, then maybe that's not the best method in conjunction with the bank that you're working at. Or if it's easier for you to transfer the money from one account to another, but your bank doesn't allow you to do that easily, then maybe you want to find a different bank. I was recently introduced to Novo. It's a completely online bank, and you can apply and open your account online in just a few minutes, which I love. You only need $50 to open the account, and Novo lets you connect your account to other bank accounts so you can really easily transfer that money. They also offer really cool integrations like with Zapier and Plaid if you want to get fancy. So Novo is a really great option if you're wanting an easy way to pay yourself, because with the Novo app, you can just log on and in seconds, you can have money transferred from your business account to your personal account pretty much with any other bank as long as they connect. The best part though is it's completely free. Novo doesn't charge any kind of monthly account fees. They don't have any monthly minimum requirements, no ACH or wire transfer fees. It's completely free. So if you're a new entrepreneur or if you're looking for a really accessible, easy to use banking option, then I encourage you to check out Novo. And you can use the affiliate link in the description to open an account, and you'll get a $25 credit directly into your new account if you use that affiliate link. All right, so the how part of how you pay yourself was easy. You pay yourself however you want. But now let's talk about what goes into figuring out how much to pay yourself. So there are two things that we need to consider before we start figuring out how much to pay ourselves. The first is how the LLC is taxed. In this episode, I'm going to focus on LLCs that haven't made any other kind of tax election and are just taxed as sole proprietors. So this means you haven't made an S Corp or a C Corp tax election. You are a single member LLC taxed as a sole proprietorship. The next video I do is going to talk about how to pay yourself in an S Corp. So if you're curious about that, keep an eye out for the next video. The second thing, regardless of how your LLC is taxed, is going to be the LLC's operating agreement. If the operating agreement gives restrictions or rules or specifications as to when a member takes payment when you pay yourself, the amounts that you pay yourself, or anything of that nature, then you need to follow your operating agreement to a T. It's pretty rare, particularly with single member LLC operating agreements, that there are those restrictions. Typically, a single member LLC operating agreement is going to leave those decisions up to the discretion of the member. So if your LLC's operating agreement is silent on it, or if you don't have an operating agreement, then it kind of defaults back to your state's laws, which generally will require either a unanimous or a majority consent with regard to distribution. So since you're the one single member, you are the majority and the unanimous consent. So unless your operating agreement gives specifications, then really you only need your own consent to determine when and how much to pay yourself. When you pay yourself from your single member LLC, you are taking a distribution of your LLC's profits. Obviously, the LLC's profits need to be used for more than just funding your lifestyle and paying you. Those profits need to be used to pay tax for the business and to pay the operating expenses for the business and, whatever else goes into your business. That profit, those funds need to be allocated to those things too. So when you're determining how much of your profit should be allocated to you, you also want to keep in mind allocating money to taxes, allocating some to your operating expenses and overhead, hopefully allocating some to savings, and then of course allocating some to paying yourself. I'll tell you what I like to do, the way that I do it. What I like to do is I will add up all of my profits over a given period. I do this on a weekly basis just because that's the way I like to do it, but that part's completely up to you if you want to do this weekly or bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever it is. Add up all of your income and determine your profits for that last period. Then allocate those funds between saving for taxes, paying operating expenses, just general business savings, and then paying yourself. So let's start with taxes and figuring out how much you should allocate to saving and paying off taxes. Unless you elect otherwise, in a single member LLC, it's considered a disregarded entity, a pass-through entity, which means that all of the LLC's income is taxed and treated as if it's personal income to you, regardless of how much or how little you actually pay yourself. So if your business makes $150,000 in a year, you're paying taxes on that $150,000, even if all of it is still sitting in the business account and you haven't taken a penny of it for yourself. The IRS considers that you've taken all of it, so they tax it all as if it's personal income to you. So with that income, you're going to have to pay just general income tax as well as self-employment tax. Since you're not an employee of your company, you're not paying yourself a paycheck where payroll taxes are getting taken out, the IRS isn't getting their payroll taxes. So instead, they're giving you this self-employment tax so they can still get their cut. The self-employment tax in total is 15.3%. And then your ordinary income tax is going to depend on where you fall in the tax bracket. So again, let's pretend my annual income for the year is $150,000. For 2019, that puts me in a tax bracket of 24%. So that gives us a very rough estimation of what we can expect to pay in taxes. We've got that 24% ordinary income tax plus that 15.3% self-employment tax. So adding those two up, I can expect to pay roughly about 39% in taxes. Now, a big caveat to that, this is not a super accurate estimation because taxes, ordinary income tax isn't applied that way. It's a progressive tax system. So even if you're in the 24% tax bracket, that doesn't mean all of your income is taxed at 24%. And this also isn't taking into account any other deductions or credits. So this is just a good starting point to give you an idea of how much of your profits should be set aside for taxes. So if you take that 15.3% and add that to wherever you fall in the tax bracket, you know, all right, at least around this number is what I'm going to be taxed. So since that number isn't 100% accurate, I'm going to lower it down to 35% for the rest of this video just to make the rest of my examples a little bit easier. So now we know about how much needs to be allocated to our taxes. Next, we want to make sure we're allocating some for our business's overhead and operating expenses. You can figure this out by looking at your tax returns for the past few years or your profit and loss statements for the past few years. Or if your business is new and you don't have previous years to refer back to, you want to do some budgeting and estimating to figure out what you can expect to pay in your just general overhead and operating expenses. And then you want to estimate about how much you're expecting to make over that year. But if we're using the method of looking back over previous years, that'll give us a way to get an average of how much we've spent in operating expenses versus how much we made over those years. So for example, let's say I look back over the past 3 years and on average, my business income is $100,000. And then on average, I spend about $15,000 every year on operating expenses and overhead. That means based off of my previous history, I can estimate that about 15% of my business's income is spent on expenses and overhead. So now we know we're allocating 35% to taxes and 15% to operating expenses. If you want to set aside a certain amount or percentage for saving for your business, that's certainly a great idea. And you'll want to factor that into the allocations too. By default, I like to just set aside 5% of my income. Sometimes I'll adjust that up or down, but just kind of a general number that I use is 5%. So now we've got 35% for taxes, 15% for operating expenses, and 5% for savings. That leaves 45% left over, which I can now take to pay myself. So in this example, I'm going to add up all of my profits from last week. Let's pretend last week I had total profits of $5,000. So now that $5,000, I'm going to allocate in those proportions that I just determined. So 35% of that $5,000 is going to be set aside or saved to pay for taxes. 15% of that $5,000 is going to be set aside and used for continuing operating expenses. I'm going to put 5% of that $5,000 into a savings account. And then the rest, the remaining 45%, I'm gonna take for myself or set aside at least to use to compensate myself. And then if there are any other categories that you want to include in there, you can certainly do that too. Like if you're trying to pay off a debt, you can factor in a percentage for each period that goes towards paying off your debt, or any other goals or things that you want to make sure your funds are allocated to. And another important thing to remember is that these numbers, these allocations, these proportions can and should be fluid and adjustable. You know, obviously, hopefully our income is going to go up over the years. Our expenses are going to change. How much we need to pay ourselves is going to fluctuate. So those numbers really will need to change. And it may take a while and do some trial and error before you get those numbers to a place that really work for your business and for you. So these numbers and the numbers that I use as an example are not any kind of set in stone number. They can and should be tailored often to fit your situation. Whenever and however you choose to pay yourself, it is important that you properly record it in your LLC's books. The money that you pay yourself as a member of the LLC, it's not an expense to the business, it's not a deductible expense, and it's not a payroll expense. It's typically referred to as a member distribution or a member draw, a member withdrawal. The most common term is member distribution. And that's often how it would be recorded in your records and in your accounting books, would be as a member distribution. Single member LLCs in particular are often examined under a microscope when they're involved in any kind of legal action, because there are no other members around to provide those checks and balances. It's easier for a single member to abuse or take advantage of the liability protection of the LLC. So when push comes to shove, it's very important that you properly record and document each and every member distribution that you take, so it doesn't look like you're just using the LLC as your own personal bank account, taking money out whenever you need it. So when it comes to how you pay yourself in a single member LLC, the key takeaways are this. Overall, your tax payments will be exactly the same regardless of how little or how much you pay yourself. There are no rules or requirements for how you pay yourself in a single member LLC. That part is pretty much up to you. And finally, for the sake of your personal liability, you should keep adequate records of each distribution, as well as documents, resolutions, spreadsheets, anything that can help to show how you arrived at the amounts that you are distributing to yourself. So as you can tell, a lot needs to be considered when you are trying to determine how much to pay yourself and how to pay yourself in a single member LLC. It's a delicate balance and a constant work in progress between your personal needs and the needs of your business. Therefore, it is strongly recommended that you work with a CPA or tax advisor who can help you determine what your tax liability is and help ensure that all of your tax payments are going to be made on time. It's also great to bring a bookkeeper onto your team. Even if it is very part-time, just a few hours a month, an experienced and knowledgeable bookkeeper will add such a great deal of value to your business, and it will save you a lot of headaches in the long run. That's all for this episode, folks. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. And again, don't forget to check the description for a link to download my written guide on how to pay yourself in a single member LLC. There's a lot more information and examples and more demos of how you go about doing it and figuring out those allocations. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm Aiden Durham, and I'll see you next time.